Greater Yellowstone was once prime grazing ground for 10-ton prehistoric mammoths.
In the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, there's definitely been a number of mammoths. When we're talking about the state of Wyoming, we're well over 60. Montana also has a number of mammoth sites.
It was also home to the earliest Americans, at least 13,000 years ago.
The Clovis people were arguably the first people in the New World. It looks like the bulk of their diet was comprised of large animals.
Mammoth bones have been found with spear points throughout Yellowstone. But scientists don't know if the prehistoric people killed the great beasts or just butchered them when the opportunity arose. Thousands of years of nature's forces have scattered the evidence that could solve this important mystery.
And very often when we find mammoths, it's because some local person's out hunting or hiking, and they find bones sticking out of a cut bank of a creek.
Were Clovis hunters capable of bringing down a creature 2 stories tall, weighing more than 5 cars stacked together, and armed with sharp tusks up to 16 feet long?
And it would have been a very dangerous thing to hunt.
We've really found some dramatic things that we never expected.
A complete mammoth skeleton is very rare, but scientists don't always need the whole beast to uncover new details about these ancient elephants. Despite their awesome tusks and enormous feet, it's the midsection that may reveal the most clues as to how an animal died in the Greater Yellowstone area. Mammoths are one of the most familiar and iconic of the Ice Age mammals. But the creatures that roamed through Greater Yellowstone traveled over the Bering Land Bridge from Asia, arriving in the region around 1.8 million years ago. They quickly adapted to a much warmer climate. In what is today Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, they thrived until the end of the last Ice Age. The mammoth's huge appetites match the abundance of lush vegetation growing in the Yellowstone area. Like modern elephants, mammoths would have had to eat a lot every day to fuel their large bodies, and probably spent most of their time grazing. A large male would have devoured between 400 and 700 pounds of plants per day. That's why a single tooth weighed up to 5 pounds when the first people arrived just under 15,000 years ago in Yellowstone. The mammoths have been busily munching away for nearly 2 million years.
I think the evidence pretty strongly points to people arriving south of the ice sheets into the Greater Yellowstone area between 13 and 14,000, somewhere in that time frame.
Dr. Todd Surevell is an anthropologist who specializes in hunter-gatherers and the first peoples of the New World. He's especially interested in how Yellowstone's first people interacted with the Pleistocene megafauna, like mammoths.
Mammoths have been walking these ecosystems and grazing in them and adapting in them for 1.8 million years. And over that time period, there wasn't one ice age. There were dozens of ice ages. The glaciers came and went and came and went and came and went. And it's almost a very regular pattern. And these mammoths had survived these glacial oscillations over hundreds of thousands of years. When mammoths go extinct, there's one thing, I believe, that's truly unique, and that's the presence of a really smart, omnivorous animal.
Mammoths lived in herds, much like elephants do today. Hundreds of tons of angry mammoths on the defensive would have been a challenge for prehistoric hunters to conquer. But the inventive Clovis people may have found a way. Dr. Surevell and his team have been excavating a mammoth near La Prelle, Wyoming for the last 7 years. And now they're unearthing clues that support this theory. The Pleistocene landscape would have looked fairly similar to today, with La Prelle Creek and the North Platte River flowing just as they do now. The biggest difference would have been the animals inhabiting the area. Today, the Platte River is home to bears, mule deer, and pronghorn antelope. But in the Pleistocene, ancient camels, American lions, and short-faced bears shared the scene with the mammoths. And as we're discovering, there were people here too.
So mammoths lived across North America during the Ice Age, and they went extinct about 12,700 years ago. So we do have a short time period between humans arriving in North America and mammoths going extinct, and that is the time period that is really of interest for this site itself, is when we see those two species interacting.
Dr. Madeline Mackey is an anthropologist at Weaver State University, and she's worked alongside Todd for years.
It's fascinating to think about someone taking down an animal with a spear that's tipped with a stone implement. You know, that's not something that a lot of us think about every day.
One of the first mammoths discovered in Montana back in 1966 sparked the team's determination to understand the interactions between the great beasts and the people of the time. The Lindsay mammoth was one of the first specimens that showed possible signs of being butchered by humans. But did the Clovis people kill the mammoth?
Columbian mammoths were much larger than modern elephants. A bull mammoth, a big bull mammoth, could weigh up to 10 tons or 20,000 pounds. They probably had a fairly large hump on their back. Once you spear them, I think they probably become incredibly dangerous.
It was dated to at least 12,300 years ago. This discovery suggested that people lived in the greater Yellowstone region much earlier than researchers had previously thought. Named the Lindsay mammoth because of its location outside Lindsay, Montana, the skeleton now resides in the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman.
There are a number of mammoths like that from North America that aren't like the typical mammoth kill sites that we find in Clovis, but where we have the association of mammoth remains. The bones seem a little broken up.
Researchers knew that the Lindsay mammoth was a mature bull about 45 years old when it died, and the beast could live to be 60. And while all of its bones still haven't been completely assembled, some were found arranged in ways that were different from natural decomposition. One femur was found lying across the other, and both were on top of the chest cavity. A design that could have only been accomplished by people. The unusual organization of the bones could not have been caused by predators feeding on and dispersing parts of the carcass. Straight cut marks on the rib and calcaneus bones were uncovered, possibly made by lances when killing or scavenging and butchering the massive animal. And the upper shoulder bones had been broken open, suggesting the removal of the marrow inside.
The types of clues that we look for on skeletal remains when looking to see if humans have interacted with them can be any sort of cut or break marks that seem intentional by humans. So these can include things like when you disarticulate joints, you can have little knife marks or chop or cut marks from when you're taking apart those ligaments. Or, chop marks from trying to break up bones to kind of extract the marrow that's in them.
But even the presence of such marks doesn't solve the mystery of whether or not the creature was hunted and killed, or simply eaten. The Clovis people used stone projectile points to hunt and dismember their game, but none were found among the Lindsay mammoth's remains.
You can have a skeleton that looks completely untouched, that was completely butchered by humans.
If they'd chanced upon the mammoth when it was recently dead or dying, they would have taken their tools with them once they'd eaten their fill. Now, Todd Saravel's team of archaeologists and paleontologists is excavating the Laprelle mammoth in Wyoming.
We found a number of artifacts that we have not found before.
At the Laprelle mammoth site that we're digging here, we have the remains of at least 3 groups of people surrounding this mammoth. Now, we don't know if all of them cooperated in the hunting of that mammoth, but it seems pretty likely that they cooperated in the butchery and the consumption of that animal.
The roughly 25-year-old Columbian mammoth was sticking out of a high bank of Laprelle Creek. The mammoth was found in 1986 by 2 locals. The following year, archaeologists made an incredible discovery: a definitive stone tool and around a dozen stone tool flakes. But nothing more was done until Saravel and his team began their work in 2014. Todd and Madeline are hoping to find proof that Clovis hunters actively dispatched the behemoth. As they dig, they're uncovering a wealth of new information about how the Paleo-Indians lived and organized their daily lives.
So this is a really big animal. And what we found associated with that is a number of different activity areas where these people camped when they were butchering and processing, maybe preserving some of the meat and consuming some of the meat associated with this mammoth.
We have a mammoth kill area, and it's surrounded by what we call 3 hearth-centered activity areas, which is a fancy way of saying a fire pit with a bunch of stuff around it.
They've also found an assortment of tools and bone needles and beads. The remnants of 3 early hearths suggests that the group stayed near the remains for a significant amount of time, likely in order to utilize every precious part of the animal. Archaeologists have 3 rules when it comes to proving human presence in the Pleistocene. Madeline explains.
And the 3 criteria you can kind of simply think of as there are human artifacts present, they are of the same time period of those animal remains, and there is some use or connection between the animal remains and the human artifacts. You have stone tools, that's a great indicator that there were humans there, because that's not something that any other species can create. We also look for association or the same timing between those human artifacts and the mammoth remains themselves. And then some sort of use. So this could be things like cut marks, or some of the tools may have blood residue, remains of mammoth blood on them, blood residue. You could also look at just butchery marks on the mammoth in general, or if they're kind of directly associated and in contact with each other and patterned together.
At the end of their first field season at the La Prelle Mammoth site, the team also stumbled on a secondary work area, dubbed the chopper block. The block has produced hundreds of flakes, bone fragments, and at least 8 stone tools, and a large ochre stain. The use of ochre pigment so many thousands of years ago is significant because it could have been part of an ancient ritual.
I tend to view it as a paint. You can think of war paint, you can think of paints, for other purposes, ceremonies, for weddings. Perhaps it was used in hide working, and somehow chemically it facilitates the tanning of the hide and also produces a really beautiful, rich leather appearance that's, very rich red. The fact that so much of it ended up here tells me they were carrying a lot of it, which tells me that it was very important to them.
The Pleistocene of the Greater Yellowstone area was a dynamic and turbulent time. Glaciers were retreating and then advancing. And while humans clearly conquered the challenges of a changing climate, many large animals did not. The investigation of mammoth remains continues to reveal how things changed.
If we see that that animal is healthy and happy right up to the day that it dies, it suggests that this probably has nothing to do with climate and ecological change whatsoever, but it died a catastrophic death. And almost certainly we're talking about a death at the hands of humans. If you're a mammoth living in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, 12,800 years ago, you basically got a coin toss whether you're going to die naturally or get speared. That's a huge amount of mortality and almost certainly points to humans as the agents of extinction.